or if there is the very rare problems with water supplies, public water supplies like there was in Hastings, then certainly there's a place for bottled water, or preferably in bigger containers, so you're not wasting resources in terms of what you're putting it in.
Well, because Joe says it's great to have someone who can give us the good information. So, Peter Robinson, thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate
My pleasure.
Good information. It's 5 minutes to 5 o'clock, so let's just quickly, panel, have a quick chat about National, who have out of the blue put forward a bill on medical cannabis. Supporters of drug reform, including the Drug Foundation, say the bill gives the detail the government's bill doesn't, but they really want the two big parties to work together. Is National just playing politics? Why didn't National deal with these issues at Select Committee? What do you think, people? Are we missing a trick here with our politicians?
Well, isn't this just politics? I think your question answered it all, isn't it?
Can we please just legalise the stuff?
The whole thing?
Yeah, of course. I mean, half the adults I know smoke it, and they don't
Half
go
the
on
adults
wild
I know don't
rampages.
smoke it, but
Then you're both right. You're both talking to the same people.
True. I was just in Vancouver, like I said before. It was.
Go on, just keep rubbing it in.
I think that are they changing? Is there law coming on in the next month? I think I recall that. I'm not sure if it's legalising or just medical marijuana, but seriously, everywhere I went, I just could smell it.
Oh, I mean, you make a good point. Politics. This just politics? Because are we burying the lead here? The debate today has been around the which of the two parties has the right method. But politically, let's just step back here. We have our two biggest parties for the first time ever, both wanting cannabis reform.
That is right.
That's a huge change from even 5 years ago.
From 2 years ago.
I
remember doing a debate on one of the shows, and even the Māori Party was opposed to it. So we've come a long way.
What's
Can
changed?
I ask a question?
Yeah,
10 years from now, do you, both of you, do you think that it'll be a legal recreational drug 10 years from now?
10 years? Yes, probably.
Probably. I think it's public perception.
So why not
that's
do it
changed. Because it's public perception, so you have to take the majority of the people with you.
National raised the point about smoking, that one of their issues is that you have to prescribe through doctors and not smoke it, because it would mix up the anti-smoking message. Is that a concern?
Well, no. I mean, if you want to solve the superannuation crisis, just bring back smoking, and that's all worked out. So the mixture of messages here is ridiculous.
So what's your message to the politicians now? We've got a private members bill that may or may not ever come out of the ballot, and we've got a government bill going through the system. What would you like to see happen?
I'd like to see cannabis legalised.
Yep.
What's one of the concerns still, because it used to be before, of what would happen once you decriminalise it or legalise it, and what would happen, to how many people would start smoking dope? Is that still the concern? The
concern seems to be more around how it's done. National wants to put the rules in about how it's manufactured and prescribed
so
now.
We don't create a...
Labor wants to leave it to the Ministry of Health to put in regulations. So.
Well, good for people who are unwell, and they can soon have some remedies.
Brilliant. All right, well, look, we'll see how that unfolds down in Wellington. It is coming up towards 5 o'clock. That's the panel. I'm Tim Watkins, filling in for Jim Moore today. Joe Bedden in Christchurch, thank you very much. Mihi Forbes here in Auckland with me, thank you. We'll be back with you here at RNZ and the panel tomorrow afternoon.
Tō tumara e hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere, hei kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight, a former chief judge of the Employment Court tells us a kind of precedent-setting legal action along the lines of the Christine Bartlett pay equity case could work for courier drivers working as independent contractors. The Eden Park Trust Board withdraws plans for a Waitangi Day charity concert to raise money for Soraya Avery's Life Pods. Former Prime Minister Helen Clark, as a neighbour, was one of the biggest opponents. She joins us along with Soraya. Also tonight, the jury in a Hamilton murder trial has heard the murder accused allowed his young daughter to text her dead mother, knowing she was, quote, rotting at the bottom of a lake. And will it be fifth time lucky in the long-running nurses' pay dispute? All of that and more coming up.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. 2 far-right speakers will be coming to Auckland after the event organisers confirmed they have secured a private venue. Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux were banned from Auckland Council venues, a decision that was challenged by the Free Speech Coalition. The event organiser, David Pello, says they'll be keeping the venue a secret and ticket holders will only find out where the event is being held at the last minute. Mr Pello says they've had to make changes to their initial plan.
We've certainly had to adapt our plan, and the reality is that if we sell out the venue that we've got early, and it's possible we could fill it again, then we will consider putting on another date.
David Pello. Eden Park has withdrawn its application to hold a fundraising concert for Saray Avery's baby life pod incubators. The stadium says time constraints and the prospect of substantial environment court costs have forced the decision. Katie Scotcher has more.
The Eden Park Trust met today and the trustees concluded it was not viable to continue with the application for the concert, which was planned for Waitangi Day next year. Its lawyers have advised the process to obtain a consent is likely to stretch beyond October and cost more than $750,000, not including legal costs. The concert plan had attracted high-profile criticism, including from the former Prime Minister Helen Clark, who lives 400 metres from the park. Ko Katie Scotcher tēnei.
A former chief judge of the Employment Court says the Christine Bartlett pay equity case could be the precedent for independent contractors like courier drivers to also take legal action. Yesterday, the government announced mental health and addiction support workers will receive the same pay rates as care and support workers who won a pay equity case taken by Ms Bartlett and the Air 2 union. Graham Colgan has told Checkpoint's John Campbell if it can be proven the contractors earn less than minimum wage, a class action could be possible. The program revealed last week that courier drivers employed by companies such as New Zealand Post are required to purchase their own vans and uniforms and are not entitled to sick pay or annual leave. Checkpoint will have more on this story after the news. Both sides have given closing addresses in the murder trial of a man who killed his partner and then disposed of her body in a lake in South Waikato. 46-year-old Corey Jeffries is on trial in the High Court in Hamilton for killing Kim Richmond, who was 42. Her body was discovered in June 2017, 10 months after she disappeared. Andrew McRae reports.
The Crown says the killing was premeditated because if it was accidental, Jeffries would have got help and not quickly got rid of her body, leaving it in the lake to rot. It says he made repeated threats on her life and ultimately killed her, then kept up a pretense that she deserted her family. The defence says Ms Richmond's death was a spontaneous and unscripted event with terrible consequences that no one saw coming. It says the Crown's case is seriously wanting and the evidence doesn't prove murderous intent. The judge will sum up tomorrow before the jury retires to reach its verdict. Ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
The Auckland Council has voted to expand the already huge City Rail Link project to cater for the increasing number of people expected to use it. Initial projections were for the rail line to reach its capacity of 34,000 peak-hour commuters in 2045, but new analysis suggests this will actually occur 10 years earlier. As a result, the Council has been considering plans to widen the rail tunnel and lengthen the platforms at 2 stations to put in a second entrance to the Karangahape Road one at Beresford Square. This will increase the peak-hour capacity of the CRL to 54,000. More than 12 hours after polls closed in Pakistan's general election, results are only now trickling in as a result with what the Election Commission describes as technical problems. Partial tallies indicate the party of the cricketer-turned-politician Imran Khan is in the lead. The BBC's Secunda Kumani reports.
Imran Khan's supporters took to the streets of Rawalpindi to celebrate. Counting of the votes is still ongoing, but it looks increasingly likely his party will be the largest in the next parliament and he will be the country's next prime minister. Imran Khan's spokesman, Naim al-Haq, announced Khan would address the nation tomorrow afternoon. However, the PMLN party, which has been in power for the past 5 years, has rejected the results. Leader Shahbaz Sharif condemned what he called rigging. He said he'll be using all political and legal means to challenge the result.
Sukunda Kamani in Rawalpindi. It's 5:05. Sport, All Blacks loosehead prop Joe Moody has been named to make a return for the Crusaders for this weekend's Super Rugby semi-final clash against the Hurricanes. Moody was unavailable for the Crusaders' 40-10 victory over the Sharks in the quarter-final because of injury. He says although he's been working hard to return to fitness for finals footy, there's a sense of guilt for replacing his informed teammates.
Yeah, Perry and Crockett, they're both world-class props, so no, they've been doing a good job. Been doing really well, actually. Almost feel a bit bad about it, you know, taking a spot from one of them on the weekend, but I guess that's just the way that footy goes. So.
Joe Moody, after defeating the Chiefs by a single point in their quarter-final last week, the Hurricanes have named an unchanged side. The New Zealand boxer Joseph Parker says he is capable of doing whatever it takes to beat English counterpart Dillian Whyte in their heavyweight clash in London this weekend. Sunday's fight will be the first for Parker since losing his world title to British superstar Anthony Joshua in April. The Kiwi fighter faced criticism for not changing up his approach in his unanimous points defeat to Joshua, but says this time around that won't be an issue.
If plan A doesn't work, we have a plan B and we have a plan C. So this time around, we have a lot of different plans that we can turn to if it's not going our way.
Joseph Parker, that's the news.
Allegations of sexual misconduct in the army.
The guys are going to hit on you, there's going to be rude comments, and then we were given some tips on how to protect ourselves. And I found that actually quite unhelpful.
It is absolutely unacceptable. I am bitterly disappointed.
As soon as that base commander knew what was going on, he acted. That is something that would never have happened 5-10 years ago.
Seeing the story through, Morning Report with Guy Espiner and Philippa Tolley, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the impact human embryonic gene editing could have on elite sport and super athletes of the future. And after 10, filmmaker Gabrielle Brady on her haunting documentary about Christmas Island, Island of the Hungry Ghosts. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Reports on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Vanuatu, also Coromandel Peninsula, Taupo, Taumarunui and Taihepe. Cloudy periods, a few showers north of Whanganui today. Showers spreading everywhere tomorrow, some possibly heavy and thundery. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine. A few showers for Bay of Plenty this afternoon and again tomorrow. Wellington, Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine. A few showers around midday tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, showers some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail tomorrow. Canterbury, fine over the plains but showers with snow to 900 metres about the high country tomorrow. Otago and inland Southland, fine. A few showers developing tomorrow with snow to 800 metres. Fiordland and coastal Southland, showers, some heavy with snow to 800 metres. Isolated thunderstorms, especially tomorrow when some can be squally. And for the Chatham Islands, showers easing tomorrow and fine breaks increasing. It's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you everyone for joining us. A former Chief Judge of the Employment Court has told Checkpoint it would be, quote, worthwhile bringing legal proceedings on behalf of independent contractors like the courier drivers whose positions we've revealed over the past fortnight. Checkpoint's investigations into the owner-operator drivers have found some are earning less than the minimum wage after costs. They do not have the protections even the lowest paid employees get under law. They do not get paid annual leave or sick pay, and they face substantial costs. All of this is legal because they're not employees. But after 2 weeks of stories on this situation, our producer Bridget Burke and I have spoken to a series of people with knowledge of employment law who say the current situation is untenable and may not stand up in court. One lawyer called it a rort. We'll hear from her shortly. We've also received a statement from the Minister saying we've shone, quote, a welcome light onto an area of employment law he is eager to address and saying the government will address it beginning next year. But that may not be as necessary if a new precedent is established in court. And it's in court that we begin.
I think what I can say is that from the limited knowledge that I have, and given that there are always two sides to a question, and any such case would be stoutly defended, and properly so. My view is that it would be worthwhile bringing such proceedings.
Graham Colgan was Chief Judge of the Employment Court from 2005 until 2017. He does not offer opinions lightly, nor does he do so without understanding this is case law and will be defended robustly.
No one can guarantee the outcome of any litigation, but an assessment of whether it's worthwhile to bring is a lower standard, but I think is met from what I know.
What we know is that in the past fortnight we've spoken to dozens of so-called independent contractors, almost all of whom have significant things in common. 1, they have bought their own vans. 2, they have paid for these vans to be branded with the logos of the company they're driving for. 3, even though the van is theirs and they're called an independent contractor, they're contractually bound to not drive for other courier companies. 4, they do not get paid sick leave and they do not get paid annual leave. And 5, if they need time off, they have to organise their own replacements. And tonight we can reveal that for some drivers it doesn't stop there. What time do you start work?
I usually start about 5 a.m.
And your first delivery is at what time?
Around about 6:30.
So for the 1.5 hours you're working before your first delivery, how are you being paid, given you're paid by delivery?
We're not being paid.
And what are you doing during that 90 minutes?
We are sorting the incoming freight into the individual runs, and then we're sorting our own freight.
And that's 90 minutes a morning every morning?
Yes, give or take.
So 7.5 hours a week if you're doing a 5-day week?
Yes.
Of unpaid work?
Yep.
We can't tell you where in the country that independent contractor works, but we can tell you they work for Courier Post, owned by New Zealand Post, which is an SOE. And that figure of 7.5 hours of unpaid sorting work a week, well, it isn't quite correct, because that was for 5 days, and they have a 6-day working week. Do you have to sort on Saturdays as well?
Yes.
Starting at the same time?
Yep.
So, in fact, you're doing more than 7.5 hours of unpaid work a week?
Yeah, about 9.
We asked New Zealand Post if drivers do sometimes sort before deliveries, and they confirmed in writing this does happen, and I quote, in some smaller unmanned sites. New Zealand Post said an hour a day's payment for this is factored into monthly minimum payments. But they've refused to tell us what those payments are, and they've been unable to tell us what their drivers earn per hour after costs. From New Zealand Post to Freightways, who own New Zealand Couriers and would not speak to us on the record at all, no one will provide us with details of driver earnings. We needed someone who's seen what they earn in multiple cases and is truly independent, and her name is Mary Nelson.
To me, it's just a rort. It's really, really unfair. And these people, you know, straight off the bat, they're in hardship.
Mary Nelson from Crawford Nelson Law in Auckland is a lawyer who specialises in tax and IRD issues and who used to work at IRD. She's seen the books many times, and I asked her how she'd describe the situation of independent contractors like the ones we've been speaking to.
It's really sad. That's what it is.
Without identifying any clients, Mary Nelson did the numbers for us, working on a fairly average kind of before-expense income.
If you're getting $30 an hour and you work 50 hours a week, that's $1,500 a week, which is $75,000 a year. So that immediately puts you over the threshold of GST. So then, if someone's getting paid that amount of money on $1,500 a week, the GST on that is $195.65. So then we're down to $1,304 a week, and then you've got to take off around about a third of that for, for the tax, for the income tax that they're going to have to pay, or provisional tax. Because provisional tax is another whole story, isn't it? Because then you've got to pay provisional tax in advance, and these people, they just don't have the funds to do that. So then we've gotten this person's income now down to sort of around about $850 a week.
So that doesn't include the cost of petrol and all of that, does it?
No, that was all that was the tax. That was only the tax. So then you've got all your other expenses on top of that.
Mary, as somebody who has worked inside Inland Revenue and now works as a tax lawyer, do you think that we who are fortunate enough to be employees understand the precariousness that many contract workers are in?
Absolutely not. The only people that I think would be able to relate to this would be solo parents on a benefit.
Their situation is that precarious?
That's how precarious it is.
That does sound extraordinary, but it echoes what David Mara from the Christchurch Budget Service told us last week.
We've seen a big change over 30 years, but that change has increased over the last decade, where you've got a whole lot of people who are doing everything right. They are working, they are trying to be self-sufficient, but they just don't they can't make ends meet.
It's not that their income isn't bad. $30 an hour is great, but that's often a gross figure, and so much has to come out. So they have the cost of the van, the depreciation on the van once they've bought it, the cost of painting the van, the cost of their uniform, the cost of their scanner, and at the end of all of that, what you are seeing sometimes is an hourly rate that is less than the minimum wage.
I would say that every contractor we have seen, the hourly rate is less than the minimum wage.
The winners are the companies that these people are contracting to. They don't have to pay PAYE, they don't have to pay holiday pay. Like, these people can't get sick. Can you imagine if you were the father of 3 children and you got sick and you're an independent contractor?
How is such vulnerability possible in law? To answer that, we went to one of the country's foremost experts in employment law, Professor Gordon Anderson of Victoria University. He says it appears to rest on a precedent set 25 years ago. In a case known as TNT Worldwide Express versus Cunningham, the issue was whether an owner-operator driver was an employee or an individual contractor. The employment court said employee, the appeal court said contractor, and a quarter of a century on, that case casts a very long shadow.
What seems to have been happening is essentially the courier companies have taken advantage of that case and have sort of been ratcheting conditions down ever since.
But that stands as a precedent in law at the moment.
Yeah, that'd be a precedent at the moment. So the options, well, really it needs resolving by Parliament.
Professor Anderson says one result of all this has been a split in the labour force. Employees have protections in law. Contractors have far fewer. But contractors have been seen as businesses and sufficiently robust for that to not matter.
The assumption really was that independent contractors were people genuinely in business on their own account and having at least, I suppose something moderately to well above the minimum.
And contractor after contractor has told us they don't. Back to Professor Anderson and a question. Do you think there needs to be some change in law?
Yep. If you go to the trouble of having a minimum wage, minimum holidays, all that sort of thing, you need to ensure that it applies generally across the labour force, not just to one part of it.
Mary Nelson puts that very succinctly.
They're wage and salary earners with no rights.
Which brings us back to where we began. The former Chief Judge of the Employment Court, who, having heard our coverage, decided to talk to us. Remember the precedent, TNT versus Cunningham? Well, Graham Colgan points out that took place under the Employment Contracts Act, and that act was replaced.
So the test that is now applied is under Section 6 of the Employment Relations Act 2000, and the test is to find out what is the real nature of the relationship between the parties.
The real nature, that's what's crucial. And when that's the test under Section 6 of the Employment Relations Act...
There's been a number of cases decided by the Employment Court in New Zealand, not involving courier drivers, but involving other occupations, and 3 of the ones that I'm aware of are commercial cleaners, a house painter, and a military doctor. And there have been other ones. But those cases have all applied Section 6.
In other words, the TNT Cunningham precedent, which Professor Anderson believes has been used by employers to wind back conditions for contractors, is starting to look out of date. There is more recent employment law, and there are newer precedents in court, not just in New Zealand. Graham Colgan highlighted 2 cases in the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, one that involved car groomers and cleaners.
All of whom had contracts to say they were independent contractors, and the Supreme Court said no, they're employees. In the last couple of months, there's been a second case in the UK involving a company called Pimlico Plumbers, and it involves plumbers, not surprisingly, who are employed by a plumbing firm that contracts with people who've got plumbing problems, and they send out these plumbers to fix up the problems. Again, the Supreme Court of the UK said they're not independent contractors, despite appearing to be so. They are employees. So the combination of those changes to the statute and case law since the Cunningham case really recasts the ground, so that it is likely that Cunningham and TNT would at least be very seriously reconsidered, if not overturned, in my view.
That's the former Chief Judge of the Employment Court of New Zealand. Now, as a former judge, he doesn't want to presume to judge, not outside a court. But as he assesses the situations he's heard about on Checkpoint, and as he looks at similar cases and at the tests described in the current law, he was prepared to offer an opinion that bears repeating.
My view is that it would be worthwhile bringing such proceedings. No one can guarantee the outcome of any litigation, but an assessment of whether it's worthwhile to bring is a lower standard, but I think is met from what I know.
Former Chief Judge of the Employment Court, Graham Colgan. Would love your feedback on that. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. In breaking news, Taupo police have launched a homicide inquiry after the death of a toddler in Tiro, not too far from Taupo, just a little bit north of it on Tuesday night. In fact, a wee way north of it. Detective Senior Sergeant Matt Cranshaw says 18-month-old Comfort Joy Witeri Thompson died from injuries that were not accidental. A post-mortem is underway. We'll update you if we hear any more on that. It's 22 minutes past 5. The Eden Park Trust Board has withdrawn its application to hold a charity concert at the famous Auckland venue on Waitangi Day next year. A media release issued this afternoon stated the Trust lawyers had advised them obtaining resource consent could cost $750,000, and trustees had decided it wasn't viable for them to continue. The concert was to have been for 1 million babies. LifePod appeal to make 2,000 LifePods to save babies around the world. Comments from Sam Morgan reported by Newsroom Work earlier this week, also by Newsroom, and emails that we've received have cast some doubt on the current status of the LifePod project. More on that coming up. But people living near Eden Park opposed the concert because of the precedent it would set, making a sports venue into a music venue. One of them was former Prime Minister Helen Clark, who reacted to the decision a short time ago.
I feel an enormous sense of relief, John. This is a park with a lot of money to spend on public relations, on everything around promoting what it wants. And yet, for me as a neighbour, the thought of a concert, Trojan horse application, no noise limits, huge disruption with trucks and trailers going, setting the precedent for the future, this is really something very, very disturbing. So I am relieved that it's been withdrawn.
The Trojan horse application, was that the thing that most worried you, that this would be a precedent and that more concerts would follow?
Most definitely. They are able to apply case by case for up to 6 a year, but I think the commercial plan for Eden Park Trust is basically to set precedents and then say it's all fine, we can be a major concert venue. Now, that is very, very concerning to me and clearly to others who made submissions against it. There is the Mount Smart venue, which has roughly the equivalent seating at 45,000 as to what they were seeking for this application. That's where concerts should go. They are set to go there. There's proper planning permission.
In terms of the Eden Park case for this, they seem to have attached themselves very strongly to the value of the fundraising that was going on here. Were you persuaded that this was a good one-off to have, given where the money was going?
I always saw it as a Trojan horse application. I think, in a sense, the person who wanted the concert in the park were using each other. One wanted a venue, the other wanted to set a precedent for concerts. Now, a concert, if it was to be useful for a charity, should go to an established venue. It shouldn't be used as a test case planning application in a way that's quite divisive in the neighbourhood.
In terms of the charity that was being supported here, and the people who were going to be beneficiaries because of the money raised, what do you say to them about the fact this concert is now not happening?
Well, my objection was based on it being a Trojan horse application. The more, however, we've heard about the proposal for the concert, the more questions have been raised by a number of people as to what the public is being asked to fund. I think the impression had been given that there were a couple of thousand incubators ready to be sent off to poor countries. This turns out not to be the case at all. These pods don't exist except in a prototype. They're not certified. They can't be tested here because they wouldn't get ethical approval. The proposal is to test them on Indian babies. The whole thing starts to become, well, shall we say, a little odd.
Of course, the criticism of you, and it's been pretty vocal, and I know you're aware of it, is that you are a NIMBY. And if we look at the Eden Park Trust media release, it says 3/4 of submissions to the resource consent process supported the Live Pod appeal concert, and UMR research, presumably commissioned by them, shows that 91% of Aucklanders and 87% of people living nearby also support it. So you were in a minority of people, it seems, who were opposed to this.
Well, firstly, anyone anywhere can make a submission, so we don't know who those submitters are, where do they come from? You know, are they friends of trust board members from all over? We just don't know. Secondly, on the methodology for this, quote, polling, end quote, we don't know what their definition of local is. In the description, it talks about people who live in Mount Eden, Mount Albert, here, there and everywhere. They may not even be in the immediate catchment of the park. So there's been very little transparency around any of that. What I know is that quite a number of my neighbours are concerned, continue to be concerned, and supported the stand taken by the Eden Park Neighbours Association.
What happens to Eden Park? How do we get it right? Because by golly, that is a valuable piece of real estate, and I drive past it very often. And every time, almost every time I drive past it, it's empty. Is it a white elephant, and are the neighbours getting in the way of it becoming more productive?
In my opinion, if the park is to be more than the sports ground it has traditionally been, and that sports ground over time has come to be a night sports venue, etc., but to be more than that is not really compatible with being in a local, densely packed residential neighbourhood. I think really thought needs to be given again to the Central Business District Stadium, which would be close to all the major transport routes in by ferry, by train, by bus, and of course by private car. That would make a lot more sense if we're planning a city for the future.
Helen Clark, neighbour of Eden Park, talking to us earlier. Listening to that is Live Pod founder Saray Avery, who I believe is joining us now live. Are you there, Saray?
I am. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. What's your reaction to the fact that Eden Park has basically said this is just too expensive for us to continue with?
Well, I'm gutted, where we've landed, and I need to, right off the bat, apologise to a few people. Firstly, I need to apologise to Nick Salter and the board of the Eden Park Trust, because it was in fact me that approached them. It wasn't that they had a Trojan horse at all. It was I met Nick through a friend of a friend. He just had a daughter called Anastasia. I've got a daughter called Anastasia. We had a coffee together, and I said, look, Nick, why don't we do something really marvellous? Let's just put on this concert and do a Live Aid concert. And I sold him the pup, really. I sold him the idea. And he said, look, this is going to get really messy, Ray, because you don't know these people from the Neighbourhoods Association. They're very powerfully connected politically and at local government. And I said, no, that can't be right. I said, look, nobody's going to stop us from doing something that's wonderful and will save children's lives.
Okay.
And I was wrong.
Okay. Why don't you just do it at Mount Smart, where they have concerts all the time and where you are welcome and where there are simply not these hurdles to get over?
Well, it was my fault because I had put together a whole program of things that could only happen at Eden Park, and that included the relationship with the sponsor, the way that we could make money and monetize the concerts from the private suites that they have there. We needed a big open plan area so that we could do competitions around gumboot throwing competitions and so on. Because right up and down the country, we were going to do a whole lot of events that were celebrating us as a country and our innovation. And so I put it together as a package that would work, and I can't pick it up and take it somewhere else. So it's dead, it's gone.
Can we talk about the innovation, the life pods? Where are you at with those?
Well, we did a fundraising campaign and over two and a half years and raised, what we said in that fundraising campaign was we needed to raise $2 million to get into production, and that meant that we had to do R&D.
Right. What stage of production are you in?
No, but that's what I'm just coming on to, John. So that was that stage. Now we've handed the keys to the manufacturing to a company in India, and they are an ISO certified factory who can manufacture it. So everything that we needed to do to get certification has been done, and now they hand it over to the factory that they need to now get the auditors from the UK to come. And
so what would this money have been for?
Well, that's a good point. The point is that there's a manufacturer there who's got the incubators. They've made pilot scale production. They're going through the validation process. And what will happen is that they won't make an incubator unless they have an order for it.
Right. Well, you're obviously aware of the newsroom coverage this week. And the stuff that Sam Morgan's been saying, the stuff lots of people who wouldn't be named have been saying about the transparency surrounding this operation. Sam Morgan asked for more details about how money was being spent and moved between charitable and commercial entities controlled by Avery. I'm quoting from newsroom verbatim here. And for return for this transparency, he'd offered to write off the $100,000 loan made in 2009. However, relations deteriorated and Avery repaid the loan. Now, I'm sorry to use your surname, but I'm reading verbatim from newsroom. There seems to be confusion about where money is going. There seems to be confusion about transparency. There seems to be confusion about where you're at.
Well, I can talk to the Sam Morgan issue. What happened was we had a patent that needed to be filled in a rapid period of time. And I phoned up Sam and I said, look, if we don't get this patent filed and continue the patent, we'll lose the patent. So we didn't have the money in the bank. And Sam made us sign a contract for $100,000, I think it was. And the caveat for that was if we didn't repay the loan within a certain time frame, we would have to pay him back $10,000. And so that was all fine. I was very relieved that we could actually keep the patents going. But however, we didn't get the money in the bank in time to meet the deadline that Sam had given us. So I went to my board and explained the situation. And our lawyer said, you should never have signed this contract because no person can profit under the charitable acts from a charity. So you've stuck up. So what I did was I paid the $10,000 interest to Sam to make the problem go away.
Okay. We've heard from a Checkpoint listener, Clive Beecham, who emailed us in saying he made a donation for 4 life pods. Now, we've just called him. Our producer, Bridget Burke, called him. Can we just play you what he said, Saray?
3 years ago, we donated $10,000 to Ray Avery's charity under the impression that we were paying for 4 life pods, and they were costed at about $2,500 each. I had seen his advertisements or promotion of this, and we were very taken in and thought this would be a great way to make a donation. And these life pods were to be distributed to the islands for use up there, and we were also told that our names would be on the life pods. So later on, we found out that the pods had not yet been produced and that our not inconsiderable donation had disappeared into some sort of developmental void. Since then, we've had no feedback or follow-up as to how our donation was used. I would be very careful about donating to this charity and, in particular, Ray Avery's tug on our heartstrings of saving 1 million babies.
Now, Saray, that's pretty tough, but the fact of the matter is you told us earlier on that these things are now going into production in India. Clive Beecham's telling us he donated $10,000 3 years ago for 4 life pods. And I just wonder how much money you have raised for life pods that don't actually yet roll off the production line.
Well, what we said was when we were doing that fundraising for that $2 million, we said we needed to raise that money to get the incubator into production, into commercial production. So we made that quite clear to the donors. Those people that did donate that money, and there's been scores and so on, they are the first cabs off the rank for this production that we're now doing. So we may have been inept in, communicating those things to that people, but all those people that have donated money that they thought they were going to get an incubator will get an incubator.
So how much money have you raised so far for the life pods?
Well, we raised about in terms of the general public, about 1.9. We asked for $2 million to get it into
Absolutely,
production.
which is a good sum of money, and people enthusiastically support this. But you needed more money from the Eden Park concert to get it off the production line in India. So the
the issue with Eden Park was that if you placed an order today, then that could go into that production schedule. So what we were saying is it's taken us this time to get to the point where we can actually put it into production. It's in production. You can actually order one, but he won't make one in India until we give him an order. So basically, we've got to play catch up.
Right. When do you think we will see them going to save the lives that you have talked about saving?
Well, it's February, and that's why we're working ahead of ourselves. In February, we were trying to get to the life pod points in time, for the concert, and then we could actually take that money. Because of the sponsorship arrangements we had, we didn't have to have any, expenses associated with the life pod.
Saray Avery, we really appreciate you fronting this evening. Thank you so much, and for answering those questions. We're very grateful for your time. Saray Avery, we ran very late with all of that, Katrina Batten. So without the sting, without promoting anything, let's go to the headlines.
The organiser of a speaking event by 2 extreme right-wing Canadians says if it sells out early, they may add a second date. David Pello has confirmed Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux will speak at an undisclosed private venue in Auckland. They were earlier banned from Auckland council venues, a decision challenged by the Free Speech Coalition. Mr Pello says ticket holders will not find out where the event is being held until the last minute. People against Teagle's plan to build a massive chicken farm south of Dargaville are celebrating a setback for the project. Teagle has suspended its application after consultants for 2 councils recommended that consent should be declined because of the potential smell from the poultry farm. The Auckland Council has voted to expand the city rail link after new analysis suggested the rail line will reach its capacity 10 years earlier than expected. The council has been considering plans to widen the rail tunnel and lengthen the platforms at 2 stations. Both sides in the murder trial of a man who killed his partner and disposed of her body in a lake have given their closing addresses. 46-year-old Corey Jeffries is on trial in the High Court in Hamilton for killing Kim Richmond, who was 42. Jeffries accepts he killed her but denies it was murder. The judge will sum up tomorrow. A former Chief Employment Court judge says independent contractors, such as courier drivers, could take legal action following the precedent setting Christine Bartlett pay equity case. Yesterday, the government announced that mental health and addiction support workers will now get the same pay as care workers, who last year won a pay equity case taken by Ms Bartlett and the Air2 union. Graham Colgan has told Checkpoint with John Campbell if it can be proven the contractors earn less than minimum wage, a class action could be taken. The police in Taupō are investigating the death of an 18-month-old girl. Comfort Joy Wikere Thompson died at Waikato Hospital on Tuesday night. Officers say the child's injuries are not believed to have been caused by accident. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 very shortly.
Thanks very much, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Madison Reedy, who's on the other side of me. Madison, Fairfax Media might merge with 9 Television across the Tasman. Fairfax Media are a very important part of life in New Zealand because
they own Stuff. So Stuff actually changed its name from Fairfax Media in February to kind of separate itself from its Australian owner, but it is still 100% owned by Fairfax Corporation, which is listed in Australia. And today, just when I thought I was going to have a quiet day in business news, they dropped a merger on my desk. So they have proposed a merger with Nine Entertainment. Nine News is probably what you've heard of in Australia. They have gone to Fairfax actually only this month, earlier in July, so just a few weeks ago. They knocked on Fairfax's door and said, hey, we'd like to buy you. Here's $2.3 billion. Would you be willing to take it?
Holy moly. Now, I'm just catching up on this because we've had a busy day working on independent contractors versus employees and all that kind of stuff. But is there the equivalent of the Commerce Commission in Australia? So there are hurdles here because
Absolutely.
This would create a giant, wouldn't it?
Exactly. So it is obviously subject to Fairfax shareholder approval as well as some court approval. But the big kind of question mark hanging over it at the moment is that Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, which is the equivalent of New Zealand's Commerce Commission. So Commerce Commission blocked the Stuff and NZME merger, and they're obviously still waiting on that Court of Appeal decision. So the same body, government authority, which is that commission in Australia, could do the same thing. They have said today that they're going to review it, and they have 3 months to do that. And if they wish to block it, they have to apply to the courts to do so.
Gosh, it'd be fascinating, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
It's creating such a giant. The aged care provider Oceania Healthcare is making more money than expected.
Yes.
What's behind that?
Well, behind that is they have aged care facilities. So it's obviously a retirement village, and they have expanded very rapidly, as they all are at the moment. It's a booming business, an ageing population, and they're just building beds like crazy, particularly in Auckland. And it was actually the revenue, their fastest growing revenue growth was from their aged care facilities. And that's more the kind of medical care side of retirement villages. So it's certainly growing, and there's certainly retired people are looking to move into retirement villages that have that option kind of later down the line. So it is certainly growing. So they posted a net profit after tax of 77 million.
Holy moly.
And last year it was only 45.
Wow.
but they did say that large increase was also a lot to do with property value spiking as well. But it is interesting.
It didn't spike that much, did it?
Well, I mean, they are building like crazy.
Right,
they have, hundreds of beds, units is the way they measure them rather than homes. And every single one they've built has delivered on time and on budget, which is, something to the likes of Kiwi Build. I mean, I'm sure the government would love to see that many beds on their books.
What happened on the markets to end the week, Madison?
The NZX Top 50, we are down. It's not even worth getting out of bed for, just 1 point to close at 8932. And the NZ dollars buying at 68.4 US cents, 91.9 Australian and 51.8 to the British pence.
Madison Reedy, thank you so much. Have a great weekend, Madison.
You too.
It's coming up to 17 minutes to 6. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. The jury in a Hamilton murder trial has heard the murder accused allowed his young daughter to text her dead mother, knowing, and this was the word used in court, she was rotting in her car at the bottom of a lake. 46-year-old Corey Jeffries is standing trial for the murder of his partner of 26 years, Kim Richmond, who was also the mother of his 3 children. Ms. Richmond's body was discovered in the back of her vehicle when it was lifted out of Lake Arapuni in South Waikato 10 months after she was reported missing. Our reporter Andrew McRae has been in court.
Today the jury heard closing addresses from both the Crown and defence. The Crown says it was premeditated and the violent product of the relationship issues the couple were facing. Prosecutor Ross Douch says Jeffries was trying to rebuild the relationship, but things weren't going to plan.
It wasn't going to work out that way, was it? And doesn't that create a situation where you could really say to yourself, God knows what might happen next? Well, now, of course, we do. What might happen next is that he gets to the point where he kills her.
He says the treatment of Ms. Richmond at the time of her death shows the depth of disdain Jeffries felt for her.
And it's a great deal of disdain, isn't it, members of the jury, to treat her in the way he did. It's contemptuous to leave that woman exposed like that, to rot in her utility. And that might well help you in understanding what his attitude was towards her at that time.
Mr. Douch says after Ms. Richmond's death, Jeffries built an elaborate fabrication to disguise what he'd done, and this continued right up until her body was found. He says Jeffries' 3 children must have constantly asked where their mother was.
Every time that comes up, this man elects to carry on this outrageous deception on his children. He allows his daughter, you heard on the interview, on the first day to get on the phone and text a dead person, her mother. That's what he was driven to.
Defence lawyer Thomas Sutcliffe told the jury that instead of showing disdain, Jeffries realised how his actions would affect his family, particularly his children.
The consequences for him and his family are immense. It doesn't matter whether or not it's a deliberate killing or it's manslaughter. The consequences are the same. It's ruination.
Jeffries admits the manslaughter of his partner but denies murder. Thomas Sutcliffe says Jeffries' killing of Ms Richmond was not premeditated.
So whatever happened on that short journey on the way home was clearly, in my submission to you, unscripted. There can be no other explanation for it. A spontaneous event with terrible consequences.
He says the killing wasn't planned as the couple had spent an uneventful night at a local social function and there was no motivation to kill Miss Richmond brewing.
No sign of burning resentment, simply no evidence of that at all. To see it otherwise, as the Crown have suggested to you, requires you to engage in pure speculation. And much of the Crown theory as to what brought this terrible event about really invites you to speculate as to what was going on.
Justice Fitzgerald will sum up the trial tomorrow morning before the jury retires to reach its verdict. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, call Andrew McRae-Tene.
14 minutes to 6. The government says time's up for the civil service when it comes to pay inequality, saying it has until the end of 2020 to end pay discrimination against women. Women civil servants, female civil servants, earn on average 12% less than men, in other words, $10,000 less a year. And the government is also calling time on the 9-to-5 working day, saying flexible hours should become the new norm. Rowan Quinn reports on this.
They said women were too sentimental to listen to reason. One said that women would always vote for the handsomest candidate.
At an exhibition about how Kiwi women have fared since getting the vote 125 years ago, the Women's Minister Julianne Genter explains how she'd close one of today's glaring gaps.
At our current rate, it would have taken decades to close the gender pay gap. We want action much faster. It's 2018. We've waited long enough.
And she says the new policy of making flexible work the norm rather than a special privilege is just as important as closing the pay gap. Ms Genter says most flexi workers are women and they often face stigma and bias, not to mention lower pay because of that. On her last working day before the Green MP takes time off to have her first baby, she says the policy is particularly important to her.
To make sure there are no barriers to women returning to work, to make sure that parents of all genders are able to balance family life with their career and ensure that they still have that career progression.
Today's policy's heavy on targets, light on details. Neither Ms Genter nor the State Services Minister Chris Hipkins know how much getting women up to the mark will cost, but they say they expect most departments to do it from their current budgets. And they don't have details of how the targets will be achieved or what will happen if they're not.
Ultimately, that is a matter that ministers have to then take an active interest in. I mean, we are the ones that sign off their budgets, we sign off their statements of intent, we sign off all of the accountability documents they have, and if they're not meeting the goals that the government set, then that becomes a matter that ministers, I think, will be looking to hold their departments and agencies to account for.
National's Amy Adams says the policy's underwhelming and a massive backdown on what the government had promised. She says it only addresses where people in the same jobs are paid differently, rather than ending differences across roles.
They can't tell us what it will cost, they can't tell us how they're going to do it, and they can't tell us how they're going to pay for it.
And while these female civil servants in Wellington are largely happy with their pay, they're supportive of the move.
It is more concerning in probably some of the lower operational roles, that there may be a separation, or that roles that a lot of females do are considered less valuable perhaps to an organisation.
So they'll say, oh, we're giving women more flexible hours so they don't have to earn as much, but it's probably a right that if we're doing the same job then we should earn the same amount of money.
I think flexibility is not just about families and mothers with children.
it can be flexibility when you have an elderly parent.
There's a huge variation in pay inequality across the public sector. At the Ministry of Defence, women are paid 38% less than men, while at Crown Law it's 30%. At the Ministry for Women, they earn 5% more than men. I Tāmaki Makaurau, more Checkpoint, ko Rowan Quinn, DNA.
It's coming up to 10 minutes to 6. Will it be a case of fifth time lucky when it comes to ending the long-running nurses' pay dispute? The nurses' organisation is urging members to accept the latest offer from DHBs, describing it as outstandingly good. But it's unclear whether nurses will toe the line, given signs of ongoing anger over staffing and pay. Looking at this for us is our health correspondent, Karen Brown.
The latest offer contains earlier pay commitments and extra money to bring forward a pay rise for senior nurses by 3 months to May 2020. There's also a better method to improve staffing through a system known as Care Capacity Demand Management, or CCDM. The Nurses Organisation Chief Executive Memo Musa told members via social media today that it's an excellent deal.
This is a huge win for members. Pay rises of up to 15,000 over the term. A guarantee of pay equity, and a guarantee of increased safe staffing. It is an astonishingly good offer.
Erin Kennedy is a Wellington nurse and union delegate. She agrees the deal's reasonable given the money DHB say is available, just over $520 million.
I'm just really, really keen to get working on the pay equity side of things, which of course will deliver, hopefully another significant rise for our members.
She also believes the care capacity and demand management system is working and will make a difference to staffing as it's strengthened.
I think there is some misunderstanding over it amongst some members. I think some members, see it as a stick that they can be beaten with.
But other nurses are less happy, including a nurse we'll call Julie, who says staffing is still a problem.
They've offered a panel of some description to monitor the CCDM and basically to tell us all that we're working in unsafe environments, which we've been saying for years.
She adds the deal won't improve conditions on wards quickly.
It's not enough to help us, like on my Monday night shift, where I worked a night where the whole team didn't get meal breaks.
Thousands of nurses walked off the job this month for the first time in nearly 30 years after giving the thumbs down to the last pay offer from DHBs, despite their union recommending they accept that deal. Julie believes her colleagues may say yes this time around.
The only justification or reasoning that they give for changing their mind this time is that they are sick of this, they're sick of it going on for too long, and they just want it over and done with.
The revised offer includes pay rises of between 12.5% and 16% over a 2-year period. A Bay of Plenty nurse, whom we've agreed to call Gladys, says it's not enough.
We need 15% across the board to even bring us up to the cost of living. We need to look at that for the pure reasons we cannot recruit and retain new nurses if we are not paying them a fair wage.
She plans to vote no to the revised deal and is lukewarm about the union's bargaining efforts, which started last year.
There are some members and some people in the NZNO that are trying very hard to represent us and what we are trying to say, but I think generally they could fight a bit harder.
Massey University nursing professor Jenny Carrier says DHBs have moved heaven and earth to get a good deal, but it's unclear what most nurses will think.
There is a long, long history of anger about the complete failure to recognise and value nursing, and whether this is sufficient to turn that around, I'm unsure.
Online voting will take place from midday next Tuesday through to 5 p.m. on Monday the 6th of August. Mo te hotaka o te ahi, ko Karen Brown aho.
We're going to head to Greece now, and the residents in the small resort town of Mati, east of Athens, always thought that if the forest fires came close, they'd be able to reach the sea. Tragically, many people were caught before they could save themselves. Rescue workers in Greece have been scouring scorched homes and burned out cars looking for survivors of the wildfires that swept across vast areas near Athens, killing at least 80 people. The flames ripped through coastal resorts near Athens at the peak of the holiday season, fanned by winds that at times gusted 100 kilometres an hour. The bodies of nearly 30 people were discovered at the seaside resort of Mati, from where the BBC's James Reynolds reports.
You could see how close safety was for a lot of people here.
in Mati. This street, which is entirely burned out, there are charred cars on either side, is just about 100 metres away from the ocean. I can see it past a couple of burned down trees. And of course, for years, people here thought that was the thing that would save them. If there was a forest fire, they would simply get to the sea. Some of them managed to do so. Can you tell me your name?
Konstantinos Trendafilidis. I had the feeling that I can do almost nothing, just run. There were flames everywhere, even close to the sea. I was trying to tell my wife we survived and we will be okay.
Did you believe what you were saying?
No, I don't really believe that. I mean, this is the end.
The police have cordoned off one area in this resort, and I can just see in the distance several people still searching through the ground, and this is where more than 20 people huddled as they were trying to escape, and they all died. And the authorities here are trying to make sure that they've gone through every piece of ground here. What's strange about the fire, which shows you the speed of the fire, is just how some trees have been completely charred and burnt down, like the ones I can see to one side of the road, and others have survived completely untouched. Just looking straight ahead at some pine trees, they are green and they are untouched, suggesting that the fire just jumped over them and hit the cars and hit the buildings here in what was obviously, to the residents here, a scene of panic and fear. What is your name?
Mary Lee. This is my house. It was very sudden. We couldn't do anything, and we went in the house and we stayed there, and we closed all the windows. We took wet towels and we stayed inside. We didn't move because it was very much fire. And
right outside your house, because I can see that the trees are charred right outside your window.
Yes. We stayed inside holding wet towels, and after there was everything burned, we stayed there until 12 o'clock in the night.
You couldn't get out of your house, and you couldn't get to the sea is 50 meters away from your house.
No, because there were very many cars that were burning. They had very much explosions, and we didn't move. I saw all the people running to the sea, and I said, you cannot do anything because you could not pass all these trees that were burning and all these cars that were parked and exploding.
That decision to stay inside saved your family's life?
Yes, that decision kept my family safe.
What do you feel when you look around and see all this?
I can't tell you what I feel. I'm here 45 years, but I'm glad that we stayed alive, and our house is, I can see, in good condition.
That's Mary Lee, ending that report from the BBC's James Reynolds. Extraordinary. Scientists say they've spotted what appears to be a sizable salt-laden lake under ice on the southern polar plane of Mars, raising the possibility of life on the red planet. Not the first time it's been raised, but this is pretty striking. Gillian Kitchener reports.
Scientists say they have found a lake below the surface of Mars. At a news conference in Rome on Wednesday, researcher Roberto Orozze said the discovery came after the European Space Agency's Mars Express spacecraft detected a reflection coming from the planet.
We came thus to the conclusion that the only possible explanation for the bright reflection was the presence of liquid water.
The first stable body of liquid water ever found on Mars. It's a reservoir about a mile beneath the ice on the red planet's southern polar plane, and the scientists say it could conceivably contain microbial life.
I mean, there are all the ingredients for thinking that life can be there or can be maintained there.
Instruments on board the spacecraft found the lake by transmitting radar pulses that penetrated the Martian surface and ice caps. Those pulses revealed a radar profile similar to that of subglacial lakes found beneath Earth's Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets. It's a groundbreaking discovery, but researchers say it could take years to find any signs of life in the water. They say it would likely take a future mission drilling through the ice and taking samples before there'd be any possibility of answering one of the great questions of science, whether life exists beyond Earth.
That report from Reuters. We're coming up to 6 o'clock. After 6 o'clock, we're going to hear more from the former head of the Employment Court talking about the situation of people who are called independent contractors but seem on the face of it to have a thoroughly dependent relationship. We've covered this at such length. But Graham Coughlin, who was head of the Employment Court for 12 years and has worked in employment law for 40 years, is thinking there really does seem to be worthwhile grounds to take a case. Lots of you asking how they would take a case. Well, there are various ways of them to do so. We'll discuss that after 6, and we're also going to have an update on these elections in Pakistan. Huge turnout, including, of course, that suicide bomber. All of that and more coming up after the pips in the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. A former Prime Minister, Helen Clark, says she's relieved Eden Park has withdrawn what she calls a disturbing application to hold a fundraising concert. The proposed concert would have raised money to create Sir Ray Avery's baby life pod incubators for premature babies in developing countries. The Eden Park Trust concluded today it was not viable to continue with the application. Ms Clark, who lives near the park, says the venue and the concert promoter were using each other.
One wanted a venue, the other wanted to set a precedent for concerts. Now, a concert, if it was to be useful for a charity, should go to an established venue. It shouldn't be used as a test case planning application in a way that's quite divisive in the neighbourhood.
A former Prime Minister, Helen Clark. The organiser of the fundraising concert says he's gutted the Eden Park Trust has withdrawn their application to hold the event. In the lead up to today's announcement, Sir Ray Avery's Baby Pod project was publicly criticised and described as lacking transparency. Sir Ray has defended the criticism and says the pods are in production. Two extreme right-wing speakers have confirmed a private venue in Auckland for their public speaking event. Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux were banned by the Auckland Council from speaking at venues it owns, a decision that was challenged by lobby group the Free Speech Coalition. The event organiser David Pellows says they'll not be revealing the venue's location until the day of the event. Mr Pellows says the location will only be shared with event ticket holders. The police are investigating the death of an 18-month-old girl in Taupō. Comfort Joy Weteri Thompson died at Waikato Hospital on Tuesday night. Taupō police say the child's injuries are not believed to have been caused by accident. They say they're in the process of identifying the circumstances surrounding her death. National says the government has massively under-delivered on its pay equity promises with the announcement of new civil service gender pay targets. The government says all core civil services must have pay equality by the end of 2020 and make flexible working hours the norm. But National's Amy Adams says the policy will only address like-for-like roles rather than inequality caused by the type of work. And she says they have no details about how they'll achieve their target.
They can't tell us what it will cost, they can't tell us how they're going to do it, and they can't tell us how they're going to pay for it.
Amy Adams. Men are currently paid an average of 12% more than women in the civil service. The police have changed their taser policy after an investigation into an officer tasering a goat 13 times. They've released graphic footage which shows the goat being tasered by an officer in a garage at a property in Oamaru in 2016. The police say an animal control officer had tried unsuccessfully for an hour to secure the goat. The Southern District Commander, Superintendent Paul Basham, says that with hindsight the incident could have been handled better.
The lessons that have been learned, the hindsight, is that we now have a better appreciation for the fact that the taser as a tactical option, if you like, is largely ineffective or is less effective against animals. And in that sense, had the officer known that, he may have chosen to use a different tactical option in terms of trying to resolve the job.
Paul Basham says the taser officers can now use tasers to deter an attacking animal, but not to capture an animal that is otherwise not attacking. People opposing plans to build New Zealand's biggest chicken farm south of Dargaville are celebrating a setback for the project. Tegel wanted resource consent to raise more than 1 million chickens a year, partly in massive barns at Arapohui. But it suspended its application after consultants for 2 councils recommended that consent is declined because of the potential smell. A resident's Faith McManus says that's heartening for the neighbours.
But at the same time, we are aware that Tegel may be going away and coming back with another batch of experts, as well as their 18 other experts, for the hearings. And we are not going to let up on the pressure. We'll keep on putting signs up and fundraising and thinking of everything that we can do.
Faith McManus. Tegel has 112 days to lift the suspension and apply for a new hearing date for the chicken farm. Partial results from the Pakistan general election suggest the country's former international cricket captain Imran Khan is on his way to becoming Prime Minister. His main rival, the party of the jailed former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, has rejected the results, saying the vote has been rigged. Election officials say the poll was 100% fair and transparent. The BBC's Secunda Kumani reports.
Imran Khan's supporters took to the streets to celebrate. Counting of the votes is still ongoing, but it looks increasingly likely his PTI party will win more seats in Parliament than anyone else, though it will still be short of an overall majority. One senior PTI figure tweeted that the results show the people want Imran Khan as their leader, and commentators believe he will now become the next Prime Minister. However, the PMLN party, which has been in power for the past 5 years, has rejected the results. Leader Shahbaz Sharif condemned what he called rigging. He said he'll be using all political and legal means to challenge the result.
Secunda Kumani in Rawalpindi. It's 5 minutes past 6. Sport. After beating the Chiefs 32-31 in their quarter-final last week, the Hurricanes coach Chris Boyd has named an unchanged side to face the Crusaders in the Super Rugby semi-final this weekend. The Crusaders side has never conceded a finals match against the Hurricanes. Boyd believes he's fielding his strongest lineup, including Geordie Barrett in the midfield, who gears up for his 10th derby match.
The reason I've started him at 13 is because I thought he played particularly well there. I personally believe he's a better 15, but he likes the midfield, and he did enough for me last week to suggest that that was the right way for us to start. I'm sure it won't be the way we finish, but I think it's a good way for us to start.
Chris Boyd. Netball New Zealand Chief Executive Jenny Wiley has signalled that the fight to bring back Silver Fern great Laura Langman may be over. Langman's loss to the national side was highlighted in the recent review, but Wiley says building leadership within the current players takes priority.
I think it's ideal to have lots of levels of experience in the team, and we have been growing new leaders, and it's really important that we keep looking after all of them. But what we can absolutely say is we want leaders throughout the court, and leaders don't necessarily mean lots of test caps.
Jenny Wiley. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights. Part 2 of our BBC search for the last of the wild axolotls. Alison Ballance has a bone or two to pick over during our changing world. And William Shatner beams in ahead of his one-man tour of Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, New Zealand. Or was that Australia? We'll help him out after the news at 7.
Tonight on the show, it's all sex, drugs and rock and roll. Well, maybe not the rock and roll and possibly not the sex, but I can promise the drugs. Medicinal cannabis, to be precise. Retired United Future leader Peter Dunn joins me in a moment to discuss the government's current bill and the opposition's counter bill. Good evening, Peter.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
It's Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Vanuatu, also Coromandel Peninsula, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Cloudy periods, a few showers north of Whanganui today, showers spreading everywhere tomorrow, some possibly heavy and thundery. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, a few showers for Bay of Plenty this afternoon and again tomorrow. Wellington, Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine, a few showers around midday tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail tomorrow. Canterbury, fine over the plains but showers with snow to 900 metres about the high country tomorrow. Otago and inland Southland, Fine, a few showers developing tomorrow with snow to 800 metres. Fiordland and coastal Southland, showers, some heavy with snow to 800 metres. Isolated thunderstorms, especially tomorrow when some can be squally. And the Chatham Islands, showers easing tomorrow and fine breaks increasing. It's 9 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
What is squally?
I don't know, like that maybe. I don't know. I don't know what squally showers are.
Right.
It's rain but showery and windy. Like that, yeah. Maybe windy showers.
Yeah. People who weren't watching on television then didn't get the joy, did they? The sheer joy of our arms doing squally. Thanks, Katrina Batten. You missed out. Thanks, everyone. It's 9.5 minutes past 6. Let's go back to the story we began the program with tonight. This is the former Chief Judge of New Zealand's Employment Court who's saying that it may be worthwhile for courier drivers or someone representing them to test their situation in court. Now, we've been looking at this for a fortnight now. This is the situation of drivers who are called independent contractors but really seem to have thoroughly dependent relationships. They are contractually bound to only drive for the one company. They buy their own van, they pay for the signage to go on the side, they pay for their uniform. At what stage does the label of them as independent contractors rather than employees become disingenuous? I asked the former head of the Employment Court, Graham Colgan.
The label is meaningless as far as the law is concerned. The law is concerned with substance rather than form. So the test that is now applied is under Section 6 of the Employment Relations Act 2000, and the test is to find out what is the real nature of the relationship between the parties. Now, I think as your previous program may have highlighted, there are some guidelines how to apply that test. The control, the integration and the fundamental guidelines, but ultimately a court has to determine what's the real nature of the relationship and in fact whether it is a relationship of employment of the employer and the employee, and that's the formula.
And there seems in law to be a precedent, and that is Cunningham versus TNT from 1992.
Yes, but that was decided, although it was decided by the Court of Appeal, so it's authoritative, it was decided under a different definition of an employee. That was under the Employment Contracts Act 1991. The Cunningham case was a case of a courier driver whose contract was ended, and he brought personal grievance proceedings saying he'd been unjustifiably dismissed. TNT challenged that on a preliminary point, saying he wasn't an employee, and that was what the case was about. The Court of Appeal took what lawyers sometimes term as a black letter law approach. They said that the case was really determined on the written contract between the parties, which said they were independent contractor and principal, not employer and employee. And so although the Employment Court had found that Mr Cunningham was an employee, the Court of Appeal said no, he was an independent contractor, and the matter finished in that case, and for courier drivers, so far as I'm aware, for a number of years.
How does this work? Because this is case law, isn't it? So does somebody have to take a case, and does that case become the universal in the particular?
Yes, and I know, I think you talked to Darian Fenton a day or so ago about changing the statute, and that, of course, is one way of doing it. It's a slow way, and I think it wouldn't be controversial to say that there'd be significant resistance from courier companies to such a legislative change. There are some ways that people who on their own can't afford to bring what would be expensive litigation, because it would go probably right to the Supreme Court and take some time and a lot of money to do. But there are ways of doing that. If, for example, if courier drivers were able to establish that they were being paid less than the minimum wage, they may be able to persuade a labour inspector from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment to bring a wage arrears claim, which would raise this issue in the courts. The other way is to do what Mr. Cunningham did back in 1992, and is for a courier driver whose contract is ended to say, I've been dismissed, I want a personal grievance, and again that issue of status would arise. Those vehicles would launch a case into the court system. As I say, it would probably be removed to the employment court. It would then go to the Court of Appeal and probably to the Supreme Court. So it's not slow. There are ways around. Sorry, there are ways to allow that to be funded, and I've got a couple of recent examples that people might not be aware of. What we call the sleepover cases a few years ago, and the more recent pay equity cases, were all very expensive cases taken by low-paid employees that went right through the court system. They were funded by a combination of a union helping those people who were either members or potential members, and lawyers who were prepared to put their names on the line and take those cases for significantly reduced fees. There are two other possibilities open in my view. One is the phenomenon of litigation funding, and there are now litigation funding companies in New Zealand and Australia that are prepared to look at taking a share of the proceeds of litigation in return for funding it so that no one's out of pocket. There could also be a class action potentially brought by courier drivers, and as I say, there may be a union that's prepared to take on their case for them. So there are a number of avenues to ensure that impecuniosity doesn't mean that these cases aren't brought.
And if the cases are brought, and as you're saying, it really only requires one, given that this is case law, then that change would be meaningful. In other words, a successful case could potentially change the status of independent contractors who are in these kind of permanent relationships.
Yeah, it would depend on the particular form of contract that the drivers have with a particular company. But so long as the general principle was established that they are employees and that other companies have similar contracts, then what is likely to happen is that the industry would need to reevaluate the position and make some changes, even though they hadn't been a defendant in the court proceedings.
This is fascinating, isn't it? Graham Coughlin, who's the former head of the employment court and an employment lawyer for 40-odd years. We're getting so much feedback on this. I thought we'd seen it all, but a couple of examples tonight of, boy, oh boy, James and Edward. We're going to get in touch with you. Edward, James, I've emailed you back, and Edward will give you a call. Thank you. And Edward, for a young man, that is a magnificent text, and we're really grateful for it. We hope to talk to you both. Right, Northland residents who dread the prospect of living near New Zealand's biggest chicken farm are celebrating after the project struck a serious glitch. Poultry giant Tegel has suspended its application for resource consent after consultants for two councils recommended it should be declined, and the future of the project may all hang on one little marae that's not at all happy with Tegel. Lois Williams reports.
Independent commissioners were all set to begin hearing the case for and against the mega chook farm in Dargaville next week. Tegel wants to raise more than 1 million birds a year, partly in massive barns on former dairy farm land 12 k's south of Dargaville. But planning experts who've reviewed the proposal for the Kaipara District and Northland Regional Councils have concluded that consent should not be granted. And Tegel has asked to postpone or suspend its application while it regroups.
The reports contained a constructive assessment of the application and in particular raised some issues that require further work. In order to respond to some of the constructive points raised, more time is required to obtain the information required to address those points and to ensure the commissioners have the best available information.
The sticking point for the experts is the pong of 1 million plus chickens. Tegel's technical experts say it's found ways to reduce the odour to 51% of a normal chook farm. But the council's experts say that can't be verified. And it's that uncertainty that could sink the project. In planning lingo, the adverse effects on the neighbours could be significant, and the experts say the worst affected could be little Kāpehu marae next door. The marae chair, Margaret Mutu, says Tegel was oblivious to the fact that whānau traditionally spend hours at a time there with their tupuna.
We did try to warn them that you've got an urupa, a cemetery, right on their boundary. You've also got a marae right on your boundary. Those things are very tapu, and therefore you cannot violate the tapu. It's not only us that will get hurt, it's Tegel as well who will get hurt if they violate the tapu.
Dr Mutu says the poultry giant has put itself seriously offside with tangata whenua by hiring someone from Ngāti Porou to write its cultural impact assessment.
That you do not go into Māori communities with absolute strangers and tell those strangers to run an impact assessment on them. And Tegel didn't want to know. Tegel said, we've hired him, he's going to do the job. The result of that was that none of the marae in the northern Wairoa would allow Tegel to come back onto their marae. So they couldn't actually carry out their cultural impact assessment.
And the council reports say the absence of a cultural impact assessment means there's also a lack of certainty over the potential effects of the Tegel farm on the urupa, and that's contributed to the recommendation to decline it. Those leading the charge against Tegel were celebrating today, but in a modest way. Local resident Faith McManus says the objectors are expecting Tegel will be back.
We are aware that Tegel may be going away and coming back with another batch of experts, as well as their 18 other experts, for the hearings. And we are not going to let up on the pressure. We'll keep on putting signs up and fundraising and thinking of everything that we can do.
The Northland Regional Council says Tegel has 112 days to come back and lift the suspension of his application and set another hearing date. In Whangarei for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Almost from one end of the North Island to the other, Hutt Valley residents are up in arms at new ecological protection designations which the City Council has placed on some private properties in the area. The significant natural area designation restricts changes owners can make to their land if the property contains ecologically significant Indigenous plants. The council sent letters to about 1,500 property owners earlier this year saying their land had been identified as part of a significant natural area, and there are now fears that could devalue the properties concerned. Anne-Marie May reports.
Residents affected by the implementation of significant natural areas have held meetings and say they have no confidence in the council's processes. They say there are mixed messages coming out, with the mayor saying one thing and council officers saying something else. Eastbourne resident Pat McShane says people are outraged that the council could impose such restrictions with no consultation.
You know, I want to build my kids a tree hut in the trees or a hut up on the bit of land we've got. They can't do that now. And they're going, how has it come to this? How is it I can buy a piece of property and then almost by the stroke of the pen, council can come along and go, right, you've now got this covenant over your land that's imposing these excessive restrictions.
Another Eastbourne resident, Catherine Cretney, says the aerial photos of her property, which the council used to assess its vegetation, are 3 or 4 years old, and she's questioning how much faith could be put in what they show.
I've got a whole lot of shrubs for a good 15 metres around, which we planted. Yet council are saying, we've got this ecological report, we've aerial mapped it, your backyard contains significant natural area. But there are no trees in that space that would be considered special biodiversity. So how effective are those maps?
Catherine Cretney says the designation of a property as having a significant natural area has already caused a problem with at least one property sale.
The buyer's lawyer sent an email to the vendor's lawyer saying, we've realised that we've entered into this agreement, but we didn't know about the SNA, and that impacts the buyer's ability to do what they want to do on that land, and therefore can we exit or reduce the buying price by 10%.
Catherine Cretney says in that case the sale and purchase agreement had already been signed, so the subsequent SNA designation made little difference. The National MP Chris Bishop, who lives in the area, says the Hutt City Council needs to back off and have more meaningful consultation with locals. He says they could take guidance from some other councils which have already grappled with the issue.
They've taken a much more collaborative and constructive approach. They've sought to individually identify particular properties that might be affected. They've then reached out to individual properties on a one-by-one basis and worked with the local community to identify those areas and make sure that some sites are protected.
Lower Hutt residents have not ruled out taking legal action against the council. The council did not have anyone available to comment today on the SNAs. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
From Lower Hutt to Pakistan, where the country has gone to the polls following an election campaign marred by violence and accusations of corruption. Early results suggest ex-cricket star Imran Khan, known to cricket lovers in New Zealand, of course, his PTI party is in the lead as votes are counted. However, the rival party of disgraced former PM Nawaz Sharif is already rejecting the results amid allegations of vote rigging. The BBC's Secunda Kamani, an excellent reporter, is on the job.
Celebrations by Imran Khan's supporters as results roll in. It looks increasingly likely the former cricketing star will be Pakistan's next Prime Minister and his party the largest in the next parliament.
I think the hard work of PTI, the members of PTI, which is now definitely, in my opinion, the biggest political force in the history of this country, has paid off. And people of not only who support PTI but also the people of Pakistan can look forward to a golden era.
Votes are still being counted, with final results likely tomorrow. Earlier today, Imran Khan cast his vote. He's promised to crack down on corruption. His main rival, former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, was sentenced to 10 years in jail following an investigation Khan pushed for. His brother Shahbaz has been leading the party in his absence. Tonight, he rejected the results, claiming fraud. This election campaign has revolved around two competing narratives about the case against Nawaz Sharif. His supporters say the Pakistani military has been working behind the scenes to ensure his conviction and remove him from power. Imran Khan says those claims are simply an attempt to distract from the corruption allegations. Residents in Rawalpindi, watching the results come in, were divided about who they believed.
Nawaz Sharif has been in power and he's been stealing from us and taking the money abroad.
I support the PMLN because they fulfilled their promises. They developed infrastructure and reduced power cuts.
Imran Khan's supporters are in buoyant mood tonight, but it seems likely he would have to form a coalition in order to take power, and his opponents seem adamant in rejecting his victory.
Secunda Kamani in Rawalpindi in northern Pakistan. 26 minutes past 6. Up to 1,000 people on Vanuatu's Ambai are said to leave the island because of concerns of intensifying ashfall due to the volcano there, of course. Ash is impacting visibility along the southern side of the island to the extent that it's blocking out the sun. Koro Vakauta reports.
The alert level for Ambai was lifted from 2 to 3 this week, signalling the volcano was undergoing a minor eruption. But the situation seems to have worsened since then, with eyewitnesses saying ash darkened the sky so much on Wednesday that vehicles had to use their headlights. Nearly 400 households have now registered to be evacuated, and a vessel is expected to take people to nearby Maiwo Island. Zoe Ayong from the National Disaster Management Office says citizen safety is a real concern.
The condition is not safe in few areas on Ambai, especially in the southern part of Ambai, where thick ashfall is recorded, and even clarity or visibility is very poor.
However, she says the evacuations will continue to be voluntary.
There won't be a mass evacuation. That's the word we want to avoid. There won't be a mass evacuation. People will move, but we will ask their consent first. If they want to move, yes or no. If they decide to stay back on Ambai, they are free to do so.
The Red Cross has been on the ground distributing supplies since last week, but Ms. Ayong says her office would be assisted by the declaration of a state of emergency. Since September, the activity at the volcano has been uneven, sparking evacuations on 2 other occasions. Ms. Ayong says a state of emergency needs to be reinstated after lapsing earlier this month.
The state of emergency will definitely enable Indiamo to access some services much quicker than normal. We can definitely have access to the emergency fund. We can also request assistance from our developing partners and even have some ongoing projects. They can definitely stop and then only focus on the Ambai response.
Meanwhile, the Geohazards Department has warned locals to stay away from the Manawa volcano as it continues to emit ash and smoke. The exclusion zone around the active vent has increased from 2 to 3 kilometres. But Melinda Aru from the department says people are still being tempted to visit the site.
We are strongly urging the local communities not to access
not to go to the caldera or to where the active event is, because some people are curious about going up and see for themselves about ashfall and the impact right at the top.
Ms. Aru says no one can predict how long the ashfall will continue, but they're monitoring the situation. For Checkpoint, this is Koro Vakauta.
Almost time to go. Some lovely feedback tonight. I really like this one. Katrina and I were discussing what squally means. Well, Peter, who describes himself as a dedicated listener, thank you, Peter, says, please ask Met Service for definitions of squally. Drizzle, shower, misty, preceded by light sporadic, a few lingering. It goes on and on. It gives me great pleasure, but drives my wife mad with me commenting on the crazy variations. And this, I live in Wellington and have stopped buying Tegel products until they fully withdraw from their proposal. This is Lois's story about the Tegel factory up north. Of course, a great way to voice support from other places in New Zealand. Lots of people contacting us about their independent contracting relationships with people who sound suspiciously like employers in some cases. We really appreciate hearing from you, and we will get back to quite a few of you. Thanks for all of your feedback and kindness and support on behalf of our excellent team. That's it for tonight. We'll see you tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Sir Ray Avery says he's gutted the Eden Park Trust has withdrawn its application to hold a fundraising concert for his Baby Pod project. 2 extreme right speakers will give talks at a private venue in Auckland, but the organisers say the address will remain secret until the day of the event. The Taupō police are investigating the death of an 18-month-old girl who died in Waikato Hospital on Tuesday night. National says the government has under-delivered on its pay equity promises, with its new civil service gender pay targets addressing only like-for-like roles. Opponents of Tegel's plans for a massive chicken farm south of Dargaville are celebrating the suspension of the application. And the police have changed their taser policy following an investigation into an officer who tasered a goat 13 times. Our next news and weather is at 7.